Now, I've got Bonner Cohen on the phone, I hope so, from National Center for Public Policy Research. How are you doing? Are you there?
I'm doing very well, and people of Wisconsin, get rid of that ethanol rule.
I'll tell you what.
Terrible.
Our DATCP is a little bit here and a little bit there. They're a little bit everywhere when it comes to, their regulatory interests, and I think that the big players tend to be the ones that drive them to enforcement actions, not what's right or what's the law. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. Bonner, I have you on the program because of last week's announcement that the Keystone XL is going to be built. It is going to move forward. And of course, within hours of the Trump administration's announcement that was going to happen, that's something in the neighborhood of 80,000 jobs associated with that project. That the environmental group said that they are going to sabotage the project. They are going to engage in they call it direct action, also known as sabotage, to try to shut down this process that they also say they intend to continue on regarding the Dakota Access Pipeline as well. We're not doing what I think needs to be done vis-a-vis law enforcement and this radical contingent that walks right up to and sometimes commits acts of terrorism just to sabotage projects like this because they somehow don't think fossil fuels should ever be consumed by Americans.
Well, yes, and we saw what happened with the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a separate pipeline from the Keystone XL. Here, environmental activists, practically none of whom had ever set foot in North Dakota before, flocked to the state. They engaged in all sorts of acts of vandalism and even violence. They left an incredible mess behind when they were finally asked to leave by one of the local Indian tribes, which had originally welcomed their support because the tribes had their own problems with the pipeline. But the activists made such a complete mess of the area, endangering, and this is the beautiful irony of the whole thing, the local drinking water supply with all the junk and the garbage and what have you that they left around, that they were finally asked to leave. And they left a very bad taste in the mouth of everyone in North Dakota, and it looks as if the opponents of the Keystone XL pipeline, knowing now that the Trump administration is determined to move ahead with the pipeline, and secondly, yes, they will take the pipeline to court, but they're probably going to lose there. So what are they going to do? They're going to, and you're quite right, they use the word sabotage. And this is not peaceful protest. This is, and these people
it's terrorism.
Exactly what? Yeah, this is sabotage.
But when George W. Bush was president of the United States, it was called eco-terrorism. That's what we referred to it as. The
Right.
FBI had a special unit on eco-terrorism, and now we're calling it protest. We're not calling it terrorism, but we're calling it protest when acts of sabotage, delay or destroy these types of projects. That's terrorism.
That is terrorism.
We should start calling it that again.
We should call it that again, treat it accordingly. The Department of Homeland Security should keep tabs on these people, find out who they are, who is supporting them, because, as we saw in the Dakota Access Pipeline, these people don't care how much property they damage, that they don't care how much mess they leave behind. When they were finally kicked out of North Dakota, they just left everything behind. This is after, by the way, they had set tires on fire. They had even fired guns at the law enforcement people. I mean, it was a real mess. And so, yes, that is eco-terrorism. And we need to bring not only the term back, but we need to deal with this in the appropriate fashion, because this is breaking the law, and it's endangering the lives and property of anybody who gets in their way.
Absolutely true. What are their complaints? I know that there was one complaint about some lizard habitat that was not going to be disrupted, but they claimed was disrupted, and there was some complaints about the potential for contamination of groundwater that was nowhere near the pipeline.
And they moved the pipeline to east just to make sure they didn't do it. One of the legal hurdles that still stands in the way concerns the state of Nebraska. They have an unusual situation there where the State Public Service Commission has to sign off on this. Trump said, hearing about this, says, well, I'll call the governor. Well, he can call him, but it's not the governor's call. It's the Public Service Commission's call. What happens here is there are some landowners in the path of the pipeline who don't want the pipeline running through their farms. And, of course, they get paid by the developer if the pipeline runs through their property. With some, that's perfectly okay. They're happy to have the money. Others object to it. That's probably the only serious legal hurdle that stands between where we are now and completing what is actually the final leg of the pipeline. Most of the pipeline's already been constructed, but farther south. What this pipeline will do, the Keystone XL, is it will take crude oil, from northeastern Alberta, south to the U.S. border, then to the Midwest, and then on to the Gulf Coast where there are refineries. And some of that oil will be sold in the U.S., and some of it will be exported abroad. Also, in addition to the Canadian oil, American oil from the Bakken Shale region of western North Dakota will also be pumped into the pipeline, and it will go to refineries along the Gulf Coast. The great thing about these pipelines is there's no public money involved. Taxpayers are not on the hook for any of this. The developers pay for everything. And what it does is it gives us an infrastructure that will enable us to use the geological gifts that we have,
right,
oil and natural gas, to keep our citizens where they can have affordable and reliable sources of energy. We can export an awful lot of that, which greatly improves our geostrategic position around the world.
You know, as I'm looking at the map of the proposed XL, because we have the existing Keystone pipeline and the proposed Keystone XL pipeline, they've shifted it. Basically, there's been a shift in Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and instead of going through Saskatchewan, it runs just through the edge, the very corner of Montana, dramatically shortening the distance and giving access, as you described, to other areas to utilize the pipeline for their own for their own movement of crude. It doesn't. I mean, honestly, Bonner, it just doesn't look that controversial when you look at the map. How did it become so controversial? There is a pipeline that is in existence already that one could argue is just as controversial.
Well, in that sense, all 33,000 miles of pipelines and oil and natural gas that crisscross the United States,
including the one in Wisconsin.
You want to rip them out?
I mean, that's the thing, is that this is about an improvement and an extension of an existing pipeline system that doesn't impact a lot of population. I'm looking again through the areas that we're talking about.
Populated areas,
very sparsely populated areas. We're not talking about disrupting groundwater. I remember they were complaining that a sagebrush lizard, which they ultimately determined the pipeline was going to go nowhere near this, as if anyone cared. Honestly, the sagebrush lizard's habitat. But it's almost like they're trying to conjure reasons. Again, the Dakota Access Pipeline, same thing. The tribe wasn't upset about the environmental impact. They didn't think they were going to realize the sufficient amount of revenue remediated back to the tribe. It wasn't an environmental complaint they had. It was a money complaint. And I'm looking here. Where's the flipping complaint here? You're actually taking it. You're running it through less population than the existing pipeline is already.
That's right. But of course, the ultimate game here is to deny us access to our natural resources, and they will come up with any pretext they can come up with to do that. Ultimately, we are told this is going to protect the planet from climate change. And their solution to that is leave it in the ground. When they mean leave it in the ground, they mean leave the oil in the ground, leave the natural gas in the ground, so that we can then depend on our electricity needs for our homes, for our factories, for our businesses, for our schools, and what have you, on solar panels and windmills.
Right, which isn't going to work.
No, exactly. They know that, but they don't care, because the goal is to put a hammerlock on our energy supplies and to undermine our own ability to take care of themselves. Remember, what most of us see as an absolute blessing, namely our ability now to access enormous amounts of hydrocarbons in shale formations throughout the United States, which has freed us from dependence on the Middle East for our oil and transformed OPEC from an 800-pound gorilla into a spider monkey. And we now have the ability not to be blackmailed by Arab sheiks in the Middle East, or for that matter, and for that matter, can offer our oil and our natural gas to people in Europe and elsewhere who don't want to be blackmailed either by the Russians or by OPEC. We have completely turned the global energy market on its head. And we are now the world's largest producers of natural gas, and we are rapidly becoming the largest producer of oil. To most of us, that's a dream come true. But to the environmentalists who don't care about human beings, this is an absolute nightmare.
You know, isn't it interesting as well that without pipeline capacity, how do you move crude? You move it on trains. Isn't it interesting that just in the last couple of years, our Senator Tammy Baldwin has been trying to make it very difficult and very costly to move crude on trains, claiming that, you know, there's a high potential for environmental disaster, explosions, all kinds of other risks involved. And yet when you say, oh, okay, we agree with you, so let's expand our pipeline capacity. Oh, no, we can't do that either. Well, then what do you want to do here? I mean, the idea is to... Right, none of the above. Right, exactly correct. But again, there isn't a rational argument against the pipeline. I guess you could say maybe the property owners in Nebraska, you know, individually would have rational complaints about it, right? But generally speaking, there isn't a rational argument about this pipeline. It's pure politics, Bonner. It's pure progressive politics, climate change politics, and building or not building the Keystone XL will have exactly zero impact on global warming.
That's right. The climate is going to do what the climate wants to do, irrespective of whether there is a pipeline or not. Again, most of the Greens actually know this, but they need a pretext for trying to deny us access to our resources, and this is it. And this is it.
28,000 direct construction jobs. The estimate is an additional 60,000 jobs associated with this pipeline project. That's not something to sneeze at. Thanks for being on the show, Bonner. Always great to have you.
Okay, thank you.
Bonner Cohen from the National Center for Public Policy Research. We'll be right back.
We all hear